They said he rode with the fury of a storm and left behind silence. His name still echoes through the bones of history. Genghis Khan, the man who built an empire out of blood, fear, and ash. But behind the roar of his conquests lies a story few dare to tell. A story about what he did to those who defied him and to the wives of his enemies. What Genghis Khan did was not just war, it was a message carved into flesh and memory. A message that said, "Defy me, and I will erase your name, your bloodline, and your legacy." Tonight, we uncover the darkness behind the empire. The side of Genghis Khan the history books whisper about, but rarely show. The story begins in the frozen steppes of Mongolia, around the year 1162. A boy named Temujin was born into hunger, betrayal, and chaos. When his father was poisoned by enemies, his family was left to die. Temujin grew up watching his mother struggle to feed her children with roots and insects. From those years of suffering, something dark began to grow inside him. A conviction that mercy was weakness and that fear was power. When he finally rose from the dust to unite the Mongol tribes, he became more than a man. He became a force of nature. He took the name Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. But to unite the world, he believed he had to crush it. When the Khwarezmian Empire insulted him, killing his envoys and mocking his power, Genghis Khan's rage ignited a fire that would consume Central Asia. City after city fell. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they punished. The men were slaughtered. The soldiers were impaled as warnings. And the women were taken. It wasn't lust. It was symbolism, a way to erase the bloodline of the enemy and mark the land as Mongol property. In Genghis Khan's mind, every enemy's wife was a weapon. Every child born from her would carry Mongol blood. To him, that was six. Freedom in the Roman world was not so easily earned. A patrol of Roman soldiers found her near the outskirts of the city. Starved, barefoot, and weak, she fought like a cornered animal. But it was hopeless. They dragged her back in chains, her cries echoing through the stone streets. When she was brought before her master, there was no pity in his eyes, only insult. A runaway slave had dared to humiliate him, and in Rome, that could not go unpunished. In the empire's grim logic, punishment had to be spectacle. Rome thrived on theater, whether it was in the arena, at the baths, or in blood. The senator demanded that Livia be made an example. Her fate would be decided not in the quiet of his villa but before the public. The punishment for female fugitives varied depending on the master's will. Some were branded on the forehead with the letter F, fugitiva, meaning runaway. Others were whipped until their skin tore apart. But for those who truly shamed their masters, the Colosseum awaited. When the day came, the amphitheater roared with anticipation. Thousands gathered beneath the blazing sun, their cheers blending with the smell of sweat and iron. To the crowd, it was entertainment. To Livia, it was the end of everything. She was dragged into the arena, her hands bound above her head, her torn tunic barely covering her bruised skin. The senator watched from the stands, his crimson cloak gleaming like blood. The announcer's voice echoed, "Behold, the punishment of the fugitive slave who defied the will of Rome." The gates opened, and from the shadows emerged a lion, chained yet furious, its mane bristling as it smelled her fear. Livia screamed, but the chains held her fast. Soldiers stood ready with spears, but only to ensure the lion didn't stray from its prey. This was not justice. It was a message. Rome wanted every slave to remember that even in death, they belonged to their masters. But Livia's defiance didn't fade. As the beast approached, she shouted words that none could forget. "You can take my life," she cried, "but you cannot cage my soul." The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat before the chaos resumed. History does not record what became of her next, but in the silence of the archives, her courage still echoes. Her story, however, was not unique. Roman women who escaped slavery faced horrors that tested the limits of cruelty. Some were nailed to crosses along the roads leading into Rome, left to die slowly as a warning. Others were forced into the mines of Sicily or Sardinia, where the air was thick with poison and none survived more than a few months. The luckier ones, if such a word can exist, were simply branded and sold again, their faces forever marked as fugitives. These punishments were not random acts of brutality. They were tools of control. The Roman elite believed that fear kept the empire running. A slave who feared death would never dream of freedom. That belief shaped laws, customs, and even religion. The goddess Fortuna was worshipped by the poor, who prayed for mercy, while the masters thanked the gods for order. But even Rome, with all its power, could not silence rebellion forever. Every act of cruelty planted seeds of defiance. In time, the empire would face countless slave revolts, from the great uprising led by Spartacus to small, unrecorded acts of vengeance in the corners of villas and farms. Behind every revolt was a story like Livia's, a woman who had nothing left but the will to be free. Life for enslaved women in Rome was a daily battle for survival. They were not only laborers but often victims of their masters' desires. Some were forced to bear children who would themselves be born into slavery, a cruel cycle that chained generations. Others were entertainers in the private chambers of the elite, living under constant threat of violence. Yet even in this darkness, they found ways to resist. They shared songs, prayers, and whispers of hope. They stole food to feed others or passed messag. Defines the legacy of Rome, not its victories nor its monuments, but the resilience of those it tried to destroy. The women who dared to escape slavery, knowing the price they would pay, became symbols of courage far greater than any emperor's conquest. They remind us that even in the darkest corners of history, the human spirit refuses to be broken. So when you see a painting of a Roman soldier standing proud beside a chained woman, remember, the empire may have conquered her body, but never her will, because freedom, once imagined, can never truly be enslaved.